All right, welcome back to the mission of God for the family. We are continuing just to talk about parenting and some of the the basics, the theological basics of parenting. We talked about the the belief in original sin being important when we parent, so that we don't get into uh, a rivalry based kind of fear based relationship with our kids, thinking that um, every time our kids sin, it's because we did something wrong. Sometimes it is because we did something wrong, but when we know that that's the case, what we do is we take that sin to the Lord, ask God to forgive us, and He does. We take that sin to our kids and say, "Oh, I shouldn't have yelled at you. I shouldn't have uh, snapped at you. You know, whatever the particular thing is. I shouldn't have manipulated you. Uh, that we ask our kids to forgive us, and because you want to be training your kids um, how to forgive their parents, right? That's an important thing because they're not being raised by angels that don't make mistakes. They're being raised by sinners. They're sinners being raised by sinners. I had a really funny interaction I remember with my daughter when she was about 10 years old. Had I had she had done something and I uh, mean uh, to to a sibling, and I said, "You know what? Have you thought about how that makes them feel? You know, that you really should." And I was being super manipulative, and was basically applying guilt manipulation to try and get my kid to act right in this moment because I didn't because we were out and I couldn't deal with it the way that we would if we were at home, and so I tried to apply some guilt manipulation and she looked at me and she said, "Unfortunately, I've been trained by my father to not respond to guilt manipulation, so you're going to have to try something else." And I was like, "Oh man, that's good. That's good." And at the same time, I was like, "But I need you to fall in line right now." She's being sassy, and but now it makes for a good story. So it was funny in the moment. She got her spankings when we got home. Oh, but we have we're sinners raising sinners, and we want to train them and teach them how to take their sin to the Lord, because their hope is in Christ, the same way our hope is in Christ. And so as the adult in the situation, we want to be teaching them how to take their sin to the Lord and be showing them what it looks like in our own life to be taking our sin to the Lord, in front of them and before them and with them, and then also taking our sin to anyone else we sinned against and asking for forgiveness, and really building a home where confession of sin is seen as a good news because they know that confession of sin is how you get rid of sin. It's not admitting sin that is going to be held over you the rest of your life, because then you avoid confession, right? If confession gets you out from under the sin, then you will come back and do it again. If confession gets you into a situation where now you can be controlled because your sin's going to be held over you, well, then you'll learn to hide your sin. You'll learn to never admit anything. Uh, um, but the goal is transformed desires, right? Is our desires being uh, for good things, right? We want our desires, our loves to be properly ordered, as Augustine puts it. Well, um, what what's good news about that is that God tells us that when our desires are properly ordered and they're for Him, then we actually find a fullness of joy, a fullness of pleasure when our desires are properly ordered. When we love God for God's sake, we love everything else because it leads us to God, right? Because it reflects God to us, right? We see, um, the how delicious a good roasted carrots can be, good the salty sweetness of roasted carrots, and we see that that as a gift from God is a reflection of something about who our God is, and that the ultimate pleasure, the ultimate joy that we are getting a taste of here is in Christ, and that forever and ever that's what we're aiming towards, right? Is that ultimate pleasure, that ultimate joy. So the marriage supper of the Lamb is going to be even better, right? And so we can look at something and say, man, this is a fantastic moment, a pleasurable moment. But down the road, there's an even greater moment coming when we see Christ face to face, when we celebrate. At the marriage supper of the Lamb, when we step into eternal resurrection life, and there's a couple of things about that. One, we are the kind of creature that when we experience pleasure, our capacity for pleasure continues to grow, right? You don't, uh, so we are a growing uh, creature. That's the way God made us to be. We aren't a static creature that we have to separate out from pleasure and separate out from the moment and separate out from time in our mind in order to avoid. Um, Going numb to all of the good things in life. We're the kind of creature that grows in our capacity for experiencing joy, our capacity for experiencing pleasure as we experience it. And this is some of the reason why you see the uh, people that try to wrench ultimate meaning out of temporal things, right? Wrench ultimate joy out of a created thing is that their capacity for joy grows and the things itself, the created things, don't. Right? We need an infinite God that we never that is that gives an infinitely growing amount of joy, or we will run out, we will get bored. But we're never going to get bored with an infinite God because our capacity will grow. But the means by which our capacity grows in a proper way is a death and resurrection. So if we look at Psalm 16, starting at verse 9, the psalmist um, the the is David in this situation, and David says, "Therefore, my heart is glad, my glory rejoices, my flesh also shall rest in hope, for you will not leave my soul in Sheol, neither will you suffer your Holy One to see corruption. You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand there are pleasures forevermore." Now, notice that at your right hand there are pleasures forevermore. That's the end of it. That's where it's leading. And we know that this is that there's an ultimate, a prophetic fulfillment of this in Christ, who, um, but in the end, this passage Acts takes and specifically applies it to Jesus, right? So we know that this is specifically in its prophetic, its typological fulfillment is pointing to Jesus. But David originally writes it about himself as well. And what he says is that I know that death is a door that leads to resurrection, and there's a joy and a pleasure on the other side of this death and resurrection, right? So he's setting up that joy and pleasure forevermore is on the other side of death and resurrection, right? And um, there's an ultimate sense for each of our lives where death and resurrection leads to that pleasures forevermore. And then there is a sense in which maybe a metaphorical sense or a sanctifying sense, what's often called tropological sense, in which that our lives take on this shape of death and resurrection, that we lose things, we give things up, and then we receive back more than we lost. That we go through pain, but we receive gifts on the other side of that pain. That we go through loss, but we end up receiving more than we lost in the process. and that is the means by which God transforms us into people that receive his presence, the joy of his presence, and the pleasures forevermore of his presence, right? That the path of life, as he says here, you will show me the path of life, the road that leads to life goes through the paths of the dead, right? I mean, that's what it says here, that the path of life goes through Sheol, that there's a dip in the path of life through Hades, through death, through the grave, through that leads to resurrection. And uh, the and that resurrection is much greater, gives more than it takes, that the death took. So that there's a fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore that we are leading our children to, right? And that sometimes it's a painful process, or not sometimes, it is going to be a painful process to get there, right? This is why it's important to learn how to not complain, right? Because, but we don't learn to complain by simply, in a stoic way saying, well, pain isn't painful, or I can pretend pain isn't painful, or I have to say, uh, thank you for the pain in and of itself, but by learning how to lift our eyes to the resurrection that we know God will provide. Right, the Spirit of God raised Jesus from the dead. Romans tells us, right, right at the beginning of Romans, that the Spirit of God raised Jesus from the dead, and that same Spirit is active in our lives with resurrection power. Right, the resurrection power that raised Jesus from the dead is what the active presence of the Spirit is in our life. And we're showing our kids, teaching our kids, helping our kids lift their eyes in hope to where the things are going through. And so that's the so it's not just that complaining is ugly and we don't like it, or I'm offended by your complaining or something, but when kids complain, we want to help them lift their eyes uh, to what's beyond whatever is difficult in the moment. Sometimes that's not even difficult. We just get a bad attitude. Um, the the and I know that this about my kids because I've seen it in myself. Sometimes it's just a bad attitude, but sometimes we're going through something legitimately difficult and we're having a hard time lifting our eyes. And that's one of the things that we do as parents is we say, God is going to bring, uh, God brings good things out of the pain. It doesn't make the pain not painful, but it means that we can learn to hope in pain and hope in suffering, hope in difficulty, because we can trust in the Lord right here in the midst of this. And it's good to be reading stories that help them see this. That Aragorn has to go through the paths of the dead to get to his throne. Uh, Frodo and Samwise have to go through the dead lands to they have to go to Mount Doom. They have in order to get to where they're going, that sort of thing. In Harry Potter, every time that Harry has to overcome Voldemort, he does it either underground or in a graveyard. Right? He's the pattern of death leading to resurrection being in our books is important. I mean, it's the same thing with Odysseus and um, uh, Odysseus and Aeneas, they have to go through Hades in order to find what they were created to be, right? So those kinds of books forming our kids' imagination are really important because that is actually the shape of reality, that pleasures and joy are on the other side of difficulties and pain. And so um, that's an important part of our discipleship of our kids. So, all right. Hope you have a great day.